Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. As I've said many, many times already, this is just a podcast made by a group of friends, which is us. And we are here just to talk about everything that really interests us, which is legal, anything that's technology, and really the intersection between the two things, how one thing will shape the other, and vice versa, really. So today I have the immense pleasure of introducing another one of our esteemed guests, Alessandro Polidoro, for Italian native speaker Alessandro Polidoro, who is an attorney of law and a digital rights advocate that will tell us something very, very interesting today. He will be talking about rights on the platform that has to do with the watching of porn. So he will be talking about Pornhub, but also other platforms, of course. So, Dr. Polidoro, do you mind telling us something about your journey? This is a very interesting, beautiful story, and we are very interested in knowing how you came across the intersection of law and digital policy, and really, what were the key moments that shaped your current career focus?
Yes, hello everybody, and thank you so much for having me. Well, where should I start? Um, so yeah, I think I've always been passionate about digital politics and digital rights in general. I think this was something that was with me already since the university years, and I remember that well, even when I wrote my thesis, I picked the subject of legal informatics that it was really near and dear to my passions. And after graduating, I started my traineeship, the mandatory traineeship that is required before being allowed to pass the bar and become a fully qualified attorney. And I was working in Milan at the law firm of the professor of legal informatics of the Bocconi, Professor Barbara Indovina. And yeah, we were dealing with a lot of cases related to cyber crimes and cybersecurity, digital forensics. And this was already for me like a way to experience firsthand the importance of regulating the digital world and the internet in general. We were dealing with a lot of cases of online gender-based violence, cyber stalking, cyber harassment, but also witnessing firsthand the shortcomings of poorly managed digital policies, both by companies and sometimes also in the enforcement performed by the regulators. Probably the most inspiring experience that I had at the beginning of my career was 2019, and I joined a campaign that was happening in Italy, an advocacy campaign targeting the Italian parliament. We were lobbying for the introduction of a new law that would criminalize non-consensual intimate imageries, what is commonly called revenge porn. And I was supporting a very talented and passionate researcher and advocate. Her name is Silvia Sementzin, and she was spearheading this very ambitious campaign that eventually succeeded. And that year, we actually saw the introduction of Article 612 ter of the Italian Criminal Code, which was a precursor of a trend that now we see happening everywhere in Europe. So, it was very, yeah, motivating and inspiring for me to see that a good idea could be brought from the bottom of just the feeling of the citizens, of users, of the people, all the way up to national regulators, and then to see it recognized years later at the European level. Yeah, these are things that really make you go move forward. And then but with the passing of time, I got more and more involved with NGOs and law firms a little bit across Europe, but also in Africa and in North America.
Wow,
And
that must have been really tough.
yeah, I mean, it's the point is that internet has no borders, and you need to we need to acknowledge that. We need to understand that it's impossible to just grasp what's going on and make a difference if we only focus on the issues related to a small portion of the world. We need to have a global perspective, and that's also when I started encountering projects more connected to big tech accountability And yeah, just the implementation of new horizontal and decentralized systems of governance for the web. What?
I
Yeah.
see a question arising from the floor which is made precisely by my colleague, Giacomo, who is also joining us today. And I see that he wants to ask you a question, so please, Giacomo, go for it.
Yeah, hello everyone. Hello Alessandro. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Giacomo.
I wanted to focus on the more on the digital rights, since our discussion will be like a bit focused on that. Among all of your experiences, did you have one particular or some other particular experiences that influenced your perspective on the Digital Services Act or as a digital rights advocate?
Yeah. I mean, of course. Thank you for this question. The Digital Services Act, well, it means many things, but one thing that has been associated with since its very beginning is content moderation. And in general, finally, set some standards, some legal protections for what is going on online in terms of information and what is circulating and what is happening on the biggest platforms that influence our everyday media diet, And in my experience, professionally speaking, I've had the privilege also and the luck to encounter several projects that were strictly connected to that. I remember in the very beginning, I was following a few projects. One was about the harmful profiling that the algorithm of Facebook was doing over some of its users. In particular, I think it got actually a little bit. It was quite, all over the news a few years ago. I think in the US in particular that it was documented. I think also through some leaks, some whistleblowers, the fact that the algorithm of Facebook had started targeting young girls affected by anorexia, and then it was like kind of spiraling them into of content and groups that were kind of pushing them into more and more dangerous behaviors towards anorexia and eventually like self-harm. And in Europe, this was also happening. There was a very famous case in Poland of the algorithm starting to profile individuals affected by hypochondria. And there was this case of a woman who was also pregnant.
That is not my mother. I can confirm that woman was not my mother. We are suddenly not Polish, but anyways.
But this was one example, but there were many. And the algorithm had detected this the interest or the condition of this person, and then they were able to document it. Some researchers, they made a brilliant project called Algorithm of Trauma, in order to document how the algorithm had been capable of just understanding the weakness of this person, and in order just to make it sure that the person would always stay engaged and completely addicted to the content, it would suggesting more and more creepy and very concerning content regarding every kind of disease, because the algorithm knew that this person was obsessively checking this kind of information more than anything else. So, there was this case and the idea of trying to bring accountability and transparency over this very concerning practice of Facebook. But then there was another project I remember on TikTok at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. I was working with some researchers, and we started documenting the proliferation of Russian propaganda on TikTok and the way that the platform was running its content moderation in different ways, depending on the country and the political alignment of these countries. There was, and there were other episodes and other examples of how significantly and how importantly these very big platforms are influencing the world and the way we see the things of the world, with the spread of disinformation and fake news and conspiracy theories. So ultimately, as a digital rights advocate, of course, the first mission that comes to mind is to empower users. But then at some point, when there is such a unbalance between stakeholders, when platforms start concentrating so much power, so much resources, it's so many resources, it's clear that it's also important to do some to contain the damage and to go after the worst practices that these platforms are doing, which, by the way, incidentally, can only be possible with the collaboration of users, because advocates and researchers, we can only do so much, but all these projects, especially the most successful ones, managed to reach a certain impact because users were willing to volunteer and donating their data, telling their experiences, and just ultimately understanding that each of us can really make a difference, which is, yeah, I think very, very important.
A beautiful point that you made, actually, because last week we've interviewed Professor Gianclaudio Malgeri, and he was just talking about vulnerabilities. So basically, the type of behavior that makes us vulnerable to our use of social networks and social media platforms. And you were, I don't know if you called him, I mean, I don't want to know it, but you were basically...
I don't know him yet, unfortunately, but I will be glad to...
That means that you
meet
definitely
him.
need to listen to our episode so that you will know about him as well, as everybody else, of course. So he was just talking about how it's important that all stakeholders in society, and as you said, users especially, tell legislators and advocates what they want to be protected from. And it's brilliant that you actually made this point. Firstly, because you allowed me to make the bridge with the previous podcast, so thank you very much. But also because it is very important that we all are committed to making the online world not a separate world, not a divergent world, but our world, a world that we want to live in. So thank you very much for this point that you made. However, you did talk about TikTok. You talked about Facebook, which for younger users, yes, it's kind of like Instagram, but like less cool. But the questions that I meant to ask you today are actually relating to another group of consumers and another website. So you have been focusing a lot of your research on porn sites. So the question is, well, first of all, how did you come across it? Well, of course, I needed to ask that question, but also what kind of problem, what kind of legal issue do you connect to that environment, and how do you think the space should be regulated?
Yes. Okay, I want to start from this last question that you just said, because I think it also continues the line of thought that we were following with the DSA in general. So when it comes to Digital Services Act and in general content moderation, the world of porn platforms is very peculiar. It presents unique challenges. And I mean, this is true for many other regulations, for many other policy aspects of this sector, but this one in particular, because you see, there are some parts, at least at the macroscopic level in terms of dynamics, that every platform has in common. Like if we see it, if you look at the evolution of the internet, the researchers have reached a certain consensus in saying that in the early 2000s we saw the rise of so-called Internet 2.0. You know, it was called the Internet of the people.
It, of course.
Yeah, it was that magic moment 20 years ago now, when all of a sudden internet, that for the longest time had been an instrument of research, but mostly for experts, IT experts, it finally opened up to the general public, to general consumers. More and more platforms were inviting people, in the sense of average users, not tech savvy, to just go there and engage and share and communicate. This is the historical time where we saw the rise of Facebook, the rise of YouTube, and actually also the rise of Pornhub. Pornhub was born exactly in that same period. It was the rise of the user-generated content, and now it's everywhere. And, this tells us that in a certain sense, Pornhub comes from the same breed of YouTube and Facebook and these other platforms. And for this reason is kind of flawed by the same destiny. You see, let's think of YouTube. You know, everybody knows nowadays that YouTube had basically become worldwide television. And it's something that maybe like 30 or 40 years ago was inconceivable. And now you can really just like upload the video and everybody around the world can watch it. And it's not even that complicated to do so. And what is the problem with that? Well, many, but the simple fact that the platform is so big and its range is so wide, it has automatically become a turbocharged disinformation machine. And conspiracy theories and other forms of problematic content can spread so easily and so quickly. And the platform itself is struggling with content moderation, with putting a stop to this content.
And
a
we are
similar
talking about YouTube still when you talk about disinformation theory.
Yes. I understand that I'm taking it maybe a little bit too wide. You want me to get started talking about porn, but I'm getting there. Give me one more minute. The point is, one last example. Let's think of Facebook. Facebook had become a platform polluted with political extremism. We've seen how it has been used to hijack elections. And the reason why I'm making these examples is because I want everybody to pause for a second and ask ourselves a question. So we see how every platform, when it gets too big, or anyway, so big that it becomes something completely new and completely unprecedented, it presents itself with new risks, new dangers. The DSA itself talks about systemic risks that, regardless of how a platform is run, just exist because the platform reaches a certain scale, namely 45 million users per month in Europe, which basically means 10% of the European population, by the way. So having said that, let's pause for a second and think, what does it mean when a platform that is a pornographic platform becomes so big for society? What is the systemic risk that exists when a porn platform becomes worldwide porn television?
Less children watching TV?
Well, this is definitely a point. The point of what the children are doing with porn platforms is actually a very big topic, and porn protection of minors in particular is becoming one of the biggest concerns of policymakers right now. But we will get to that in a second. But the real problem is that it sets a standard for sexuality. Let's realize that sexuality, it's still a taboo topic. Sexual education, it's still something that is not commonly provided at school for everybody. Many people are still quite clueless about their body, their intimacy, but not because of their fault, just because it is very difficult to find easily accessible and consistent information and research on that. So in lack of everything else, porn platforms become the new reference. Porn platform become the new example. Unfortunately, though, having the same flaws of the other platforms, having the same problems of the other platforms, this platform as well will present us with some problems, namely the pursuit of endless engagement. The fact that the platforms want us to have our eyes and our attention completely dedicated to them, and they don't want us to look at anything else, because every second that we spend there, it's a little more profit for the owners of these platforms. And for porn platforms, this means that, extreme pornography, hardcore pornography, and content that sometimes can look violent and even somehow abusive becomes the norm. There is a lot of research saying how, for instance, there has been there is a lot of confusion, especially in young adults, on how to actually they're supposed to engage in sexual activities with their partners, and they say. I've seen it. I've heard it many times. Young people are saying, "We know that what we see on this platform is not the right thing, is not how we should do things. But then, what should we do? What do we have to do?" And there are many projects that I find very interesting that's trying to, fill in the gap and try to provide this sexual education that is so much needed and so lacking. But unfortunately, they cannot thrive. They cannot succeed. Most importantly, they cannot reach the same network effect and grow exponentially because of the fact that these very big giants in pornography are completely gatekeeping the market and not allowing its development.
So, Professor Polidoro, let's just once more. The problem is not in the existence of websites that provide porn content. The problem is in the way they provide it, because they are online platforms that follow a model that's similar to that of YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. So it's not the content in itself that you are advocating against. It's the way it is provided. That is correct.
Thank you very much for this question, because this is exactly the point that I always try to make. Maybe moving on with the conversation, we will talk a little bit more in detail about some of the projects that I am running. And every time I have to specify that when I say that we have to go against big tech in porn, I'm not saying that we have to go against porn. There is a lot of stigma. There are many, ultra-conservative groups out there that would simply like to see the entire sector banned and criminalized. They attribute a moral judgment to the industry, and basically they say that this is immoral, this is wrong, and of course there are problems stemming out of it because of its nature, that it's so as I said, wrong and immoral. But this is absolutely not my point. I actually think that the opposite is true. When we look at the history of humanity, and also maybe in the production of art, we can go all the way back to the Roman times, and we can go back to Pompeii, the city that was covered in the ashes of the Vesuvio, and then presented to the historians some centuries ago when they discovered it again. And if you go there, you can look at the frescoes, and there is even a fresco that was found, actually more than one, way more than one. Some frescoes that were found in the building that used to be a brothel, and is depicting adults engaging in sex. Sexual activities openly, and this is a 3,000 years old form of pornography. Pornography in its stricter, in its more precise sense, because these people are sex workers. These people are were represented in a brothel, which was exactly a professional context for sexual pleasure, which is what pornography stands for in the end. Because pornography, the etymology of pornography literally means, so it comes from porne, which means sex worker or prostitute, and then of course graphia, that it's drawing, writing of something. So it literally means drawing sex workers, sexual professionals, And
ladies and gentlemen, this is a public call to invite you, rather than visiting Pornhub every single evening, hopefully not, please go visit Pompeii. It's a beautiful city, and yes, I am not paid to plug Pompeii, but we'll never know.
Yeah, no, of course, this is always a good idea. But I also, the message here is not don't visit porn platforms. The message is don't visit the tech giants. Go. There are so many other alternatives, and for once, this is actually it can be a pride for Europeans, because usually Europeans are always following trends when it comes to technology and innovation. Well, when it comes to sex tech startups and ethical pornography, platforms for ethical pornography, Europe is actually leading. We have a lot of great examples in Spain, in France, even also in Germany, in Italy, in Czech Republic, and so on. And as I said, there is nothing wrong with that. The problem is the way it is run, the way it is perceived. And I guess this also kind of brings me to the other question that you were asking me. So how I personally ended up engaging so much with the sector and running projects connected to the industry. If you want, I can move on to this.
Yeah, think of the details, but
well, you see, so what happened is that a few years ago, I was collaborating with a group of researchers. They used to be called Tracking Exposed. Now they recently rebranded in AI Forensics. An amazing group of people. They're doing great work also today, and they were running a research regarding the bias of the algorithm of Pornhub, the recommender system of Pornhub. So basically, the machine that decides what's the next porn video that users are going to watch after the first one that they picked, and they wanted to understand if there was any prejudice in this algorithm, if there was any bias. And surprise, surprise, they found out that the algorithm is sexist. And I mean, this was, of course,
isn't the algorithm supposed to be sexist on Pornhub though? Because I suppose that the person watching it wants to see a specific performance, no?
I said sexist, not sexy. So, the problem is that it was basically only serving or mainly catering towards the typical straight man. It was basically reinforcing the bias of so-called heteronormativity, or also often referred to as male gaze. In other words, if you are a white straight man who wants to watch porn, there is a very huge selection for you and you can have a lot of fun. But if you are not, then you will probably the algorithm will drive you into a cluster of lesser content, also actually, sorry, a smaller cluster of content, which will basically create an algorithmic ghetto for you. And, this is just a form of disparity that these researchers were documenting, which I found very fascinating. But while I was going through their documents and their findings, what I found even more fascinating is that, the way the algorithm was understanding the preferences of the user in itself was illegal, was unlawful. It was not written anywhere that the algorithm was tracking sexual preferences of users. And sexual preferences of people is actually a very sensitive kind of data. It's a very delicate data. There is a specific article of the GDPR, of the General Data Protection Regulation, that says that you need to have explicit consent when you want to process the sexual preferences of people. But instead what was going on Pornhub? Nothing. No consent at all.
Something was going on Pornhub by definition, but...
Excuse me?
Something was going on Pornhub by definition, but...
Yeah, but nothing compliant with GDPR. Because, the problem is that, how you go, especially in Europe, every website that you access, there are all these banners that say, hey, we're using cookies. Do you consent for us to use cookies? And you see it everywhere, right? You see it on Facebook, you see it on YouTube, you see it on Amazon. I don't know what's your favorite website, but I bet you are used at this point to click on the button consent, or consent only to the necessary cookies, or I don't consent and stuff. And for so long, every platform was doing it, except Pornhub. Pornhub had no consent banner until last year. So for 15 years, roughly, they ran their business without ever asking people, hey, are you okay if I keep track of what you're into, sexually speaking? And it's so concerning because some websites, they know what's your favorite color of shoes. Some other website know, I don't know, what's your favorite album of Bob Dylan. But Pornhub knows if you're straight or if you're gay or if you, whatever you are into in your most intimate part of your sexual life. And they have to be accountable for this. What happens if this data gets leaked? And maybe one specific person who's having a very important, maybe recovers a public, with a public figure and gets exposed for their sexual orientation. Or even worse, what happens if all of a sudden there is a list of all the users that have, I don't know, like homosexual interests, and all of a sudden an extremist political group with a discriminatory agenda managed to get their hands on this list? Do you see how concerning that is? And this is why we launched a campaign called Stop Data Porn. It's a strategic litigation campaign, which basically means that we went and sued Pornhub, both in Italy, which is where we were based at the time, and in Cyprus, because this is where Pornhub is based when it comes to European data protection law. And the crazy thing is that we spent a few years preparing for this case, and then we launched it last year. And I was talking with my team. I was like, guys, this is going to be a litigation. It takes time. It's, how it works, the judiciary. It's always a little bit slow. I think that we will see some impact. Maybe it will take 1 year, 1.5 years. So we have to be patient. Everything happened in 3 weeks. The international press picked up on us immediately. The Data Protection Authority of Italy, the Garante, made a press statement supporting the case. But most importantly, Pornhub ran for cover instantly. And after a few weeks, they immediately implemented the cookie banner. They updated their privacy policy. But I have to say, the litigation is still pending. The case is still ongoing. We are waiting now for the final decision. I think that what they did was more of a superficial solution rather than a really systematic change in their data practices. But anyhow, this is how I engaged for the first time with the pornographic sector. And at that point, it was last year, this project was being so successful. So I was chatting with a few colleagues. And that's when we thought, okay, but GDPR is a regulation that has been around for already 6, 7 years. Maybe it is time to look for something else, to look for something more interesting and maybe a little bit broader. And that's when we saw the opportunity with the Digital Services Act. You know,
Yeah.
this is maybe another story that I would be glad to tell you now, but I don't know if we have time. But long story short, we decided to expand our action to the entire porn sector. So not only Pornhub, but this time we also made affected with our work X Videos, which is the main competitor of Pornhub, and Strip Chat, which is another very big webcam porn site that is also based in Cyprus.
Other websites are available to this podcast. Sorry, I have to say it.
Sorry?
I have to say it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
There
Okay.
is
Yeah. Yeah. I
okay.
mean, that's super interesting. Like I was listening to everything, and it's really amazing. And I wanted also to ask something about mostly about the future, like in the European regulation landscape. Like I was watching the commissioner hearings 2 weeks ago, and the commissioner designate, and I think when this podcast will be out, it will be the commissioner for justice law. He was talking about this digital fairness act. There will be like a package that will come out probably with a new commission or a law. So I wanted to know, in your view, like, do you think how is gonna evolve the digital regulation in the European Union? Do you think like that we're gonna see another trend, or from the one that we have had so far, like more regulation or simplification and just giving more space to these big tech platforms, for example, for the port sites?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult to predict what what will be the development of the upcoming EU tech regulation, and in particular the Digital Fairness Act. This is definitely something that is it's kind of a hot topic right now, because it's the new, it's supposed to be the new big thing, you know, the new big regulation. In this case, of course, it's about fairness, and it's about consumer protection, so tackling dark patterns and unfair practices of platforms. It's interesting because it's a very peculiar overlap. So because it's an overlap both in terms of topics. Somehow it almost feels like there is a duplication, you know, because many of the issues that are relevant for the DSA will also be relevant for Digital Fairness Act, simply from a different perspective. So, the Digital Services Act has an article that sanctions the presence of dark patterns. So this is an issue that is already somehow manageable through this legal instrument. But the Digital Fairness Act will definitely get back to it and and tackle it even more in details. Not to mention, well, I mean, I don't think that it's that right now it makes sense to discuss, what will make it and not make it in the Digital Fairness Act during the negotiation phase. But there is definitely one thing that we already know, which is exactly as you said, the fact that the commissioner, the commissioner, McGrath, is the commissioner of DG Justice, which is a different director general than the one that is now responsible for the enforcement of the DSA, which is instead the DG for telecommunication, and so DG Connect. And this basically means that one thing that I'm very curious to see, honestly, besides the actual content of this regulation, that we will see what will make it in the regulation, as I said, and many are excited about more EU tech law. Others are actually feeding into this new argument that says that the EU is over-regulating, and now we used to be proud of the fact that we had the highest quality and the highest standards, but now it feels that taking a look at global markets, some policymakers are becoming more interested in the, quick and dirty, quick and cheap instead. But regardless
New category for Pornhub, basically.
yeah, I guess. But regardless of this, the point is that we will have two regulators kind of acting and enacting different regulations in the same field. And this is the part that makes me more curious, because the interaction between these two regulators will probably be an interesting laboratory, especially for us, for legal nerds like us.
Doctor, just one last question before I actually wrap it up. This is all very beautiful. Regulation is amazing, and I mean, we are all geeks, as you said. But I want to ask you to play devil's advocate. Would you be able to think of some stakeholders that may not be happy to see this much regulation in the Pornhub and porn website sector?
Yeah, I mean, almost everybody. No, but I mean, this was, of course, I was being hyperbolic, it's an exaggeration, but regulation never comes with, an easy, very rarely, I think, we've seen, a positive reaction to, the introduction of new rules and most importantly of new compliance obligations, especially when it comes to the running a business. Who will not be happy with all this regulation? There are different kinds of stakeholders, sometimes not even agreeing with each other, except for the fact that they all dislike new regulation. As I said, the first group that does not like regulation happening in the porn sector are the people that are against porn. Very recently, there was a statement from an anti-porn NGO that said that the work of the European Commission with Digital Services Act in the porn sector is actually wrong and should stop, because they said this industry cannot be reformed and it cannot be sanitized. That's the word that they used, which I find quite problematic for different reasons. But the point is, again, that anti-porn groups do not want to see new regulation, do not want to see better standards, best practices being developed for the sector, because they don't want to fix it. They want to destroy it. They want to eliminate it. And, as a lawyer, I always like to specify that there is a big difference between making something illegal and making something disappear. Because let's look at other subjects that have been criminalized, and this has proven to be the wrong way to go. No, let's think of there are some drugs that are currently still illegal in many countries, and the war on drugs has proven consistently to be a massive failure, which is why also when we look at some of the major European countries like Germany, they're opting towards new trends of legalization, but not in the sense of liberalization, in the sense of regulation, because regulations create protections for everybody, create protections for the people involved, and creates protection for the people that do not want to be involved. But then, as I said, there is also part of the industry that does not want this regulation. Definitely big tech. Big tech does not want to be regulated. They want to be free to run in the digital far west and to be basically the superpowers, the unchallenged the dominators of the internet. And so they see every form of regulation, even if it's presented as a clear way to protect citizens, to protect their own users, they see it as a burden. They see it as an overcomplication of their business, and maybe something that will reduce their profit, their yearly revenue by a few percentage point, and therefore is not welcome. And of course, to these people, I say, it's about time, because it's actually the legal vacuum, the lack of regulation that has characterized the internet has lasted for way too long, and unfortunately has produced a lot of problems that we've seen. So there is no doubt that beside from greedy, there is no real argument that can be made by tech giants against regulation.
However, wouldn't you say that some tech giants, like for example Meta, have
Hmm.
been very happy to implement regulations when they were asked to do so by their consumers, for example, in a Congress hearing in the US, and not being imposed them by, for example, the European Union?
I'm sorry, are you referring to the Congress hearing that was triggered by the leak of Cambridge Analytica and the fact that they favored the interference in national elections? Because in that case, I honestly don't think that they were happy about the regulation. I just think that
They weren't happy
they
of
got caught.
regulation.
It's really
They weren't happy of the regulation, but they were definitely a bit more prone to implementing some policies they were agreeing to and not that where they were imposed above.
Yeah.
I'm playing devil's advocate myself. I don't agree with these points, but I am a lawyer. I mean, at least I attempt to be.
No, I understand, and of course, this is a fair observation on your side, and I understand. Well, let me tell you this: if you look at the history of how big platforms have, as you said, regulated themselves, or agreed to regulation instead of seeing them imposed, it has always come from something going terribly wrong first. Since you mentioned Facebook, maybe it must be worth Googling the case of the very infamous case of the genocide in Myanmar that happened on Facebook due to a very insane lack of content moderation for non-English content, where an entire portion of the population was basically attacked by another part of the population in Myanmar, thanks to a lot of fake news and disinformation that different actors, including state actors, were spreading on the platform without any form of content moderation, any form of protection. Now we can't say that Facebook is sitting at the table with regulators and talking about the best ways to do content moderation, but they're doing it with a genocide on their back. They're doing it with many other very serious incidents, and we're getting back to pornography. Pornhub is the same. Pornhub got involved in a very terrible scandal a few years ago. That almost caused a Visa and MasterCard to cut ties with Pornhub, and basically in a second almost sending the platform bankrupt. And there have been other scandals more recent that have also particularly shocked the digital rights community regarding these platforms. And only now they are being invited, but actually forced to regulate themselves. And as I can tell you, they are not happy. They're not happy. Look at the spending, the yearly spending in lobbying for tech policy that the tech giants are doing in the past years. It's increasing by millions every year. And this is not lobbying for for someone else. They are lobbying for themselves. We see how, if you go to the hearings when they negotiate every regulation, we see how they try to water down every disposition, every new part. In the DSA, the part that says that gender-based violence is a systemic risk was added at the very last minute and highly challenged by many tech giants because they thought that this would have been too complicated. And I can go on, there are many other cases of failure of self-regulation. But I understand that it would be very beautiful to believe that these platforms are like these enlightened monarchs, and sometimes they decide to withdraw from power and profit for the sake of everybody else. It simply does not happen, and that's the sad truth. But you know what? There is also one last group. I want to spend one more minute saying it because I think it's important. There is one last group that is not necessarily happy about the regulation. This is also like these small and medium enterprises and also sometimes the performers, the adult content creators of the platforms, because higher regulation means higher compliance obligation, which in turn means higher costs. So if you are a small business and you want to start your small business, when you have to deal with these compliance costs, this can be difficult. The fact that you have higher costs means that you have to meet a higher threshold and you have to make a higher investment and incur in a higher risk. So they also are not happy. And to them, I try to say, this is actually something that I keep argumenting every time that I have the opportunity to talk to them. I try to tell them that yes, in the short run, it might look like something that is not convenient, but actually, the DSA and tech regulation in general in the porn sector is a good thing, because this is a sector that is stigmatized and that is problematic. And sometimes it's problematic for real. It's not just moral panic. There are some problems. Rape culture polluting these platforms is a real issue. Misogyny online is a real issue. With these regulations, we can solve or at least tackle this problem and start making systemic change. And when this will happen, when we will start seeing the effects of these new regulations, the stigma will slowly reduce and possibly eventually dissipate. The industry will get out of the corner in which it is right now. And finally, we will be able to talk about sex without giggling, without taboos, without, as I said, a lot of prejudice and bias. And ultimately, this will only be beneficial for the entire sector and also for the businesses that are trying to enter it, because the sector will become bigger.
That is really, really beautiful to hear. I'm sure that this will make some of our followers a little happier. And what can we say? I mean, it is true that in porn as in life, well, better safe than sorry, I guess. And just to wrap up before we let you go, because we've been you've been so generous with your time, and we are really grateful for that. It is the 1 million question. Do you have any suggestions of books, podcasts, TV series that you think really would help people understand this topic?
Yeah, for sure. So, well, on the subject of digital intimacy and in general the connection between humans and the intimate life of humans and technology, in particular with AI, there is this very famous movie from 2013. It's called Her. I think it was famous because if I'm not mistaken, Scarlett Johansson is doing voice acting in this movie, and she's interpreting this AI romantic companion, this AI agent that is accompanying the main character throughout the whole movie, and she won an Oscar for this movie, if
She
I'm
won
not
an
wrong.
Oscar for that, and she also won some specific AI companies wanting to steal her voice. So this is a really
Yeah,
hot topic. Well, Scarlett Johansson is a hot topic by definition, but anyways.
the OpenAI, you're right. This is what happened, right? That OpenAI asked her to sign a contract to give her voice. She said no, and then apparently they scraped it and muffled it a little bit,
It's very similar to Scarlett Johansson's voice, which is quite noticeable in general. So yes, thank you.
yeah.
It's a very good suggestion. I know that geeks like me will definitely enjoy that movie.
Yeah, and if you want to talk more about the problem of big tech and what is going on in general with how big tech is slowly trying to overturn some of the political principles that have informed our society for a long time, there is a very nice book that is called Big Tech Scoop. How companies cede power from states and how states can claw it back. It's
Well, they become ministers of Doge, apparently, so that's a really good way.
Yeah, right. Mimifying their way into political institutions, which, for some of us that are passionate about classical history, naming naming a department after a meme is probably the cyberpunk version of when Caligula put a
I was
horse in the
thinking of the
Senate.
same.
Yeah. And for those who don't know the story about the horse of Caligula, Google it, because or ChatGPT it, or just like find a book that talks about it. It's very
There
good.
are other search engines available on
Oh
the web.
yeah, DuckDuckGo, Ecosia, for sure. You should actually use them, especially. You are absolutely right. And lastly, you asked me for podcasts, and I can imagine that people that made it so far into our episode today are probably also interested more specifically in the topic of pornography. There are two podcasts that I really, really like that can be very enlightening on what's going on in porn at the moment, and in particular with Pornhub. One is actually by the Financial Times. It's called Hot Money, Porn, Power, and Profit. And it talks about Pornhub, but it also talks about OnlyFans and Xvideos and all the other big players. It talks about the roles of payment processors and how they've been in charge until now for the content moderations, and what is good porn and what is bad porn, even though nobody knows, and even though, like, why is Visa and MasterCard deciding that? Who knows? And yeah, it's incredibly interesting and a very fascinating, well-produced podcast. And another one, which is called The Pornhub Empire, produced by CBC.
Mhm.
And it talks more particular about the story of Pornhub, the rise, and what it looks like to be the fall of this platform, actually.
You will find, I am told, the link to these suggestions in our description. So we are helping all of you to follow these beautiful and very insightful suggestions by Dr. Polidoro. And I shall wrap up, say goodbye to everyone. Thank Dr. Alessandro Polidoro for his beautiful contribution to our podcast, and hope that you will click a follow and keep listening to us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me
Thank
here.
you.
And thank you, Giacomo, for being here with me, as always.
Thank you. Thank you, Alessandro, especially. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.